Okay, you can start your stopwatches now. I am very proud of it. First of all, may I thank the St Andrews Society for inviting me to this splendid dinner. It's an especial honour to address you all. That's not to say I'm entirely sanguine about the prospect immediately ahead of me. I'm very easily intimidated. And there have been various times in my life when I have been intimidated, and I'll just mention some of those. When I was at the British Museum and we were opening the new Hellenistic Gallery of Greek Antiquities in 1998, the Duke of Edinburgh came up to me and said, "What the hell are you doing here?" Taken aback and not being used to the unsubtle way in which he tortured his victims, I could only splutter, "Because this is where I work." Another occasion, we were visited by President George W. Bush in 2001, who was on his way to the G8 summit in Genoa. We had to bring the mountain to Mohammed on this particular occasion for security reasons. So we had to decide what we were going to bring to show him. We thought he might respond positively to our collection of medals which had been created by King George III. But I rapidly realised that he didn't really know too much about who George III was. And so I had the embarrassing moment of wondering whether to explain it to him or whether to pass on to something else. Then there was the occasion when I had to explain what the British Museum was to a crowded classroom of North Koreans in the Great People's Study House in Pyongyang. I was flanked by large portraits of Kim Il-sung, the eternal leader, and he was dead at the time, and Kim Jong-il, and for some reason I felt it uneasy. But not so uneasy as I felt in January 1991 in one of the great halls of the Kremlin, when I had to address a very large and very vociferous crowd of inebriated Russians celebrating, yes, Burns Night. I never knew until that moment that vodka was the chosen drink of the immortal bard. But the reason tonight I'm even more intimidated than ever before is that I know that you, as the cream of Philadelphia's Scottish society, are intelligent, alert, and entirely sober. So I know you're all awaiting to hear my extended exposition of Scotland in the mid-18th century, around the time when St Andrews Society of Philadelphia was founded in 1747. It's remarkable that your society was already well established when many of the greatest works of the Scottish Enlightenment were being published. Adam Smith's treatise on capitalism, The Wealth of Nations, was published in 1776. William Robertson, the principal of Edinburgh University, produced his 3-volume History of America in 1777. Not as he ever set foot in America. While David Hume's Inquiry Concerning the Principles of Morals was also published in that year, 1777. Well, looking around the room at your eager anticipation, I was certain that you were expecting to hear a 2 or 3 hour lecture on the Scottish Enlightenment. But as I'm starting to suspect you know it already, perhaps I'll change my theme. So I thought first of all about soccer. And I'm sure one of the things you're thinking about a great deal at the moment is which team will come bottom of the lowest reaches of the Scottish Football League. Will Cowdenbeath manage to hold themselves above Stenhousemuir? Who knows, or has ever been to Cowdenbeath or Stenhousemuir, I wonder? Do they in fact even exist? Whatever happened to Third Lanark? It was my favourite bottom team because I wondered whatever happened to First and Second Lanark. It's the same sort of thing as when I was young. The railways in Britain had first and third class compartments. I wondered whatever happened to the second class ones. So what I suppose I have to say a word or two about, but it won't be very long, I promise you, is about Scottish science in the 18th century, but how it actually influenced Philadelphia to make Philadelphia America's first science city. First, I need to explain that Scotland was in many ways ahead of England at that time. In 1800, Scotland possessed 5 universities to England's 2. Those were, of course, Oxford and Cambridge. But the syllabus, of course, in Oxford and Cambridge was geared towards producing clergymen and school teachers of Greek and Latin, who produced more scholars of Greek and Latin. The problem was partly that to attend Oxford or Cambridge, you had to adhere to the Church of England, which is a problem for Catholics, non-conformists, and let alone Jews. The rise of Scottish science started because Scotland saw a gap in the market, with commercial advantages of offering medical degrees. Along with medicine came science. In 1726, the Lord Provost of Edinburgh, George Drummond, decided that his university could do with a medical faculty to draw fee-paying students into Scotland and encourage Scots to stay at home instead of gallivanting off to Europe. He had 5 bright young men trained at Leiden in the Netherlands. And when they got home, they established the medical faculty in Edinburgh in 1726. Now, I mustn't leave Glasgow out of the story, but the faculty there was not planned in the meticulous way that Edinburgh's was. And although Aberdeen and St Andrews could, in theory, offer medical degrees, you didn't have to know anything about medicine to actually get a medical degree. But America did need trained doctors in the 18th century, and almost immediately students started to pour into Old Reekie and Glasgow from America and the Caribbean. Of 4,000 medical students trained at Edinburgh in the 18th century, 10% had come from America and the Caribbean. And in the second half of the 18th century, 85% of all doctors trained in Britain had been trained in Scotland. It was a remarkable figure. However, at the end of their course, when they were examined in Latin. And I have no doubt that this caused a little bit of problem for the colonists, but they got their degrees in the end. And most of those who crossed the Atlantic to be trained in Scotland returned back across the Atlantic at the end of their course. I won't bore you with a list of the hundreds who established the early scientific culture of America, but I must mention just a few. John Redman, who was the first president of the College of Physicians in Philadelphia, John Morgan, who founded the medical college here, Benjamin Rush, chemist and founder of American Psychiatry, and that's the start of a major industry. Caspar Wister, professor of anatomy, who did much more than invent wisteria, though he did that as well. Pennsylvania Hospital was the first modern hospital in America and was jointly founded in 1751 by Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Bond. Bond, it is true, had studied in London, but Franklin made a point of visiting Scotland twice in 1759 and 1771, and was so hugely impressed by the Edinburgh Medical School that he wrote a long letter to Bond to tell him so. The wonderful Franklin, who had already established the American Philosophical Society, made a special point of spending significant time with David Hume and Adam Smith in Edinburgh, but he also sought out Joseph Black, who's just been mentioned, the greatest of chemists, who discovered carbon dioxide, and there was a strong draw for young Americans. Americans particularly wanted to go to Edinburgh because of Black. He was renowned for his teaching, and he conducted demonstrations to his students in an almost theatrical style. And after his death, 3 Philadelphia doctors paid him an ultimate compliment by publishing his course of lectures here in an edition of 1807. It's published here in Philadelphia. Undoubtedly, some aspects of Scottish scientific life which outright Americans would, there are some aspects which Americans would not want to import from Scotland. There were the extramural teachers who made a living by wandering the country and by giving thrilling but totally misleading courses of science. An infamous teacher was a German who called himself Dr. Katterfelter, who taught his pseudoscience in Scotland from Haddington to Inverness. And there was the Scotsman James Graham, who devised what he called a celestial bed. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail about this, it wouldn't be right with ladies sitting here. But he had various young ladies who were involved in this. You could hire the bed with somebody else, and during the course of the night you'll be given certain electrical shocks, which was said to be to help the procreation. A slightly more respectable example of a wandering teacher was the blind Scot Henry Moyes, whose travels actually brought him here to Philadelphia in 1785. And here it said he gave lectures to audiences of between 1,000 and 1,200, an almost unbelievable number. He was especially popular with women, who, it was said, are ready to break their necks after him. A contemporary report said that they started queuing at 5 o'clock for 7 o'clock lectures so they could get front seats. So by the end of the 18th century, this city, Philadelphia, was a ferment of scientific activity. You might disagree with my suggestion that there was relatively more activity and knowledge of science within the community there than there is today, relatively speaking. It's a remarkable thing to say, but it's well worth thinking about. So now, here to end, comes the controversial bit. The union of parliaments between England and Scotland occurred in 1707, as we all know. It was said to be an economic necessity for two main reasons. Firstly, because the English imposed taxation on Scottish goods being exported southwards, and the more specific one, that Scotland's investment in the Darien scheme, which was attempting to set an east-west trading post in Panama in the 1690s, was a dismal failure. Perhaps 1/3 of Scotland's fiscal reserves were lost in that particular venture. Anyway, union happened, and it has dismayed many Scots ever since. From the 1970s, some felt that the discovery of North Sea oil would allow Scotland to become economically independent, and that union could be reverted. In the 1990s, the Scottish Parliament, with limited powers, was established. But in September 2014, a referendum of those in Scotland was held. It rejected the idea of an independent nation being established. Then last year, as we all know, Britain rejected its membership of the European Union. That's Brexit. Scots, however, voted strongly in favour of staying in Europe. It's all one big mess, but there may be a solution for Scotland, and this is what I suggest. But let me say beforehand, I want to mention an unlikely source of guidance with me in this matter, George Bernard Shaw's 1928 play, The Apple Cart. It is, like most of Shaw, complex. But in short, Britain's King Magnus is aware of a major political crisis, and the problem is how to solve it. Enter the American ambassador in London, whose name is Van Hatton, who suggests that the United States rejoin the British Empire. Magnus sees the obvious danger, then that his country would become just another American state. Now, I suggest that this might have been no bad thing actually in 1928, and I've got a solution based on this for the Scots today. They probably could never remain in Europe if they gained independence. Spain and other European countries would fiercely object. But Scotland, having rejected Britain, could ask to become the 51st state of the United States. And I say this on the basis that American states have high levels of autonomy that Scotland would, of course, wish. So is Scotland a viable size? Well, I've looked at some statistics here. Scotland has a population of 5.3 million at the moment. It would find itself to be the 23rd largest state, between Minnesota and South Carolina. Its population density would place it at 19th, between Michigan and South Carolina. And its gross domestic product would make it 50th, between Washington and Maryland. But you might object that Scotland has no border with America, but then neither has Alaska. But it's so far away, you might argue. Well, Anchorage to Washington, D.C. is 4,300 miles. Glasgow to D.C. is only 3,400. The only remaining problem that I see, and I see many of you enthusiastic about the solution, is the future of the St Andrews Society in Philadelphia. Because from then on, those born in Edinburgh and Glasgow would be Americans, not Scots. And the society would inevitably dwindle in size. So just think about that. So though my solution might seem entirely viable, you might think it undesirable. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the speaker for those wonderful, entertaining remarks. We now, as you know, in gratitude and recognition of our speaker's contribution this evening, we grant to him the medal of the Speaker's Medal of the Society of the St. Andrew Society of Philadelphia. And here it is. Robert, if you stand up.
Robert!
Now,